Sometimes what hurts most is not the abandonment itself, but the way it happens. The way someone manages to smile while pushing you out of their life. My name is Helen. I'm 72 years old, and until 3 months ago I lived in the same house I bought with my late husband in 1981 in Columbus, Ohio. It was one of those simple light wood houses with an L-shaped porch, a front yard, and a narrow hallway that made a strange noise when the wind hit it from the right side. It had cracks in the kitchen tiles and a permanent smell of stale coffee, but it was my world. And now, I'm a woman sitting on a chair with wheels, staring at a wall that's too beige, waiting for dinner time in a place they call home, but where no one ever calls your name. It all started with a sweet, almost charming phrase. "Mom, you deserve a new house." That's what my son said when he showed up here in March, with that smile he only learned to use when he was an adult. A smile that reminds me of used car salesmen, too charming not to be hiding something. Daniel, my only son, 36, a digital marketing entrepreneur, lives in Indianapolis, shows up every couple of months, and always arrives as if he were a celebrity being nice to his fans. He never liked my house very much. He said it was dark, that it smelled old, that it needed an upgrade, and maybe it did. I just didn't know that the upgrade would come with a one-way ticket to limbo. He convinced me easily. He said he would renovate everything. A couple of months, Mom. 3 at the most. In the meantime, I've got a wonderful suite for you in a great modern geriatric home, with VIP service, a room with a TV, balanced meals. It'll be like a spa, only with nice nurses. I laughed. Of course I laughed. Anyone who grew up in the 1950s, with homemade bread and slippers as a threat, laughs at expressions like VIP geriatric home, but I trusted, because when you have a child, you give them everything, your body, your future, your memory. And you're wrong to think that love is enough to guarantee a return. During the first week in the nursing home, they prefer to call it a residence for the elderly, as if the word nursing home had been thrown out with the typewriters. I tried to look at it with a positive eye. The room had large windows, the sheets were too white, and the bathroom looked like a cheap hotel. Everything smelled of disinfectant and disguised abandonment. The nurses smiled, yes, but it was a rehearsed smile. The kind of smile you practice in the mirror before going to work with someone you don't want to hear it from. At the cafeteria table, I sat between 2 ladies who spoke little and wore flowery sweaters. One of them cried quietly every afternoon. The other asked me on the 3rd day if I remembered the password to her safe. She said she was sure I was her niece. I didn't have the heart to correct her. Daniel called me twice in the first 2 weeks. He said that the renovation was going well, that the construction crew had already demolished the kitchen and removed the carpet from the living room, and that the plumbing was being replaced. He asked me to trust him, and I, idiot that I am, did. Because you can't be suspicious of someone you've just seen learning to walk, even when they're already looking at you as if you were an old page in a book that they only keep on the shelf because they're too ashamed to throw it away. The truth arrived in the dirtiest way possible. On a Tuesday, with no visitors, no letters, no telephone. I was spending my time looking out of the window, watching the cars go by, wondering who were the people who could still come and go without being accompanied by someone in white. One of the staff, Kevin, a young man who seems genuinely human from time to time, commented that he had seen a house similar to mine, advertised by a local broker. He joked that, if it was yours, Mrs. Helen, they should give you a commission. I laughed, but the laugh choked in the middle, and it stayed. It planted doubt. The next day, I asked one of the nurses to use the computer in the lounge. She helped me open the real estate website. I didn't even have to type in the address. The house appeared on the front page, with 12 photos taken at angles that tried to hide the cracks in the walls. The caption read, "Beautiful, newly renovated house for sale in a traditional neighborhood. Ideal for families or investors." There was my kitchen, without the fridge magnets, without my husband's antique clock, without my embroidered dishcloths. There was my bathroom, with another mirror, my bedroom, with another bedspread. Everything the same, but without me. My fingers were cold. I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I just stood there, looking at the pictures of the life that had been stolen from me, while the nurse asked if everything was all right. I couldn't even answer, because I'm old, and old people don't complain. Old, thanks. Old women accept. Old becomes a beautiful burden that you put in a clean corner so it doesn't bother you. My son didn't take me to a temporary home. He took me from my home, renovated it, and sold it. He sold my story as if it were merchandise. I was handed over like part of the rubble. I didn't sleep that night. I kept listening to the ticking of a clock that wasn't mine, lying in a bed that never smelled of me, in a room that never heard my silence. And it was then that I understood. It wasn't just the house he had sold. It was me. The next day, I pretended to have the flu, so I wouldn't have to go down to the cafeteria. I didn't want to hear people chewing while I digested the confirmation that my son had pushed me into a nursing home as easily as you change an old chair for a new one. Because that's what you become, isn't it? Furniture that's too old to match the decor. That morning, I stared at my hands and realized that I couldn't remember the last time anyone had held them without professional obligation. The hands that cooked for him, that put Band-Aids on his knees when he fell, that cradled his nightmares. Now, all they do is press the doorbell to ask for help getting up. I spent the whole week unable to think of anything else. I didn't have the heart to call him. I wouldn't have known what to say. You don't want to hear explanations from someone who betrayed you with a smile. You want to be denied. You want it to be a lie. We want someone to come running and say, "It's not like that." And then we can breathe a sigh of relief and think, wow, I almost believed that my son had sold me the house. But no one came. Not even him. Not even a phone call. Not even a damn message saying, "Mom, is everything okay?" On Sunday, after much insistence, one of the carers, who treated me with a strange tenderness, took me for a walk to the back garden. She said it was sunny and that I should get some air, that it would help, as if fresh air would heal a wound that had been opened with a notarized signature. But I went. It was one of those days when the sky seems so exaggeratedly blue, as if the whole world was making fun of your pain. I sat on a bench near the rose bushes and tried to remember at what point in my life I began to accept crumbs as a form of love. When Daniel was little, he was affectionate. He would come to me in the middle of the night just to sleep against my arm. He would draw pictures that said, "Mommy, I love you," with crooked letters and hearts drawn in pen. And I thought that was eternal, that a child who loves you when you're 6 loves you forever. Nonsense. I thought about calling my sister Martha, but I haven't spoken to her in over 2 years. We drifted apart after she criticized the way I raised Daniel, and I, as a good blind mother, cut off contact. Now I see. She was just trying to warn me. She said that I gave everything away too easily, that I said yes before I even heard the whole proposal. I called it love. She called it submission in disguise. And maybe she was right. Maybe I taught my son that a mother's love is something that doesn't need to be returned, that a mother can take anything, even being discarded. I came back from the garden with a pain in my chest that wouldn't go away. It wasn't physical. It was a kind of bitter knot that slowly lodges itself and then refuses to come out. I wondered if it was what they call depression. I've never been one to give sadness a nice name, but that feeling had a specific taste. I like being forgotten. At dinner, I sat in silence. The other women were talking about their children, as if there was still some honor in it. One said that her son came every week and always brought an apple pie. The other showed a photo of her granddaughter, who smiled dressed as a princess in an expensive school. I feigned interest, and for the first time, I felt ashamed of being a mother. The second time, I decided to call Daniel's number. I stared at the borrowed cell phone for over an hour before typing. When he answered, I heard a noise in the background. He seemed to be in a cafe, laughing with someone. He answered by saying, "Hello, Mom," with an animation that made me want to scream. I just said, "You sold my house." He remained silent for 3 seconds, and then let out a, "Mom, I was going to tell you, I was." But it all happened very quickly. A good offer came along, and I thought it would be better for everyone. Better for whom? I asked. He tried to explain, said that with the money from the sale he was thinking of investing, that in the future he could help me even more, that it was all part of a bigger plan. And I listened to that as if I were listening to some broker pushing life insurance on me that I hadn't asked for. I hung up without saying another word. He texted me later, but I didn't read it. I didn't even want to know. From that day on, I started to see everything differently. The walls of the room seemed smaller. The windows seemed further away. Meals began to taste like nothing. It felt like I was in a thriller movie, but the monster had already appeared, and it was my son's face. I tried to talk to the home psychologist, but she was too young. She looked at me like someone reading a book she didn't understand. She wrote everything down in a colorful notebook, asked questions along the lines of, "And how did you feel about that?" and then said that it was all a matter of reframing. Reframing. What a horrible word. I don't want to give another meaning to what happened. I want it not to have happened. Over the next few days, I started to do something I never thought I would do. Count how many people have died in the asylum since I arrived. 3. Mrs. Lorraine, who always smelled of talcum powder, Mr. George, who talked to himself in the hallway, and a woman called Alma, who never spoke to me, but who sang softly when she thought no one was listening. They died quietly, as if they were apologizing for being a nuisance. Nobody talks much about it. They just collect their belongings and clean the room quickly, like someone erasing a typo. That's when I realized I'm living in a death chamber, a place where you wait for the end like someone who waits for the bus, in silence, standing, and hoping that it will be late. And my son left me here, as if I had done something wrong, as if I had asked for it, as if it were fair. That night, I went to the bathroom mirror and stared at my face for long minutes. I tried to find there the woman who raised a son on her own, who cleaned other people's houses to give him an education, who ate stale bread so she could buy the expensive sneakers he wanted. But that woman was no longer there. All that remained was an old woman with deep-set eyes, thinning hair, and the expression of someone who understood too late that love doesn't guarantee a return, that even when you give everything, you can still be left in a corner. And the worst part is that sometimes the corner smells of lavender and clean sheets, and that's when the pain gets colder. I can't remember exactly the day I started to lose track of time. In the asylum, the hours slip by unhurriedly, and the days aren't days. They're just sequences of lights on and off, lukewarm meals and the sound of footsteps dragging in the corridor. In the morning, there's always the sound of metal trays being stacked, and in the afternoon, the silence is cut by long coughs and songs that nobody asked to be played. I stopped looking at the calendar hanging near the television in the common room. It has pictures of landscapes from other states, flowery Wisconsin fields, Arizona lakes, Colorado mountains, but in here, everything is stuffy and horizonless. Even the windows look tired. I started staying in my room longer. I refused group activities, yoga for the elderly, poetry workshops, watercolor painting. Who here has the energy to pretend they want to learn how to paint when all we care about is whether anyone will remember we're alive next Christmas? One of the carers even asked if I was depressed. It's funny how they put names to things just so they can stick them on a clinical observation sheet. I said no, I was just tired. And she smiled, like someone who doesn't believe me, but doesn't want to insist either. Deep down, I think they also know that there are pains that can't be medicated. After that phone call with Daniel, the weeks passed like blurs. He never came to see me again. No visit, no apologies. Not even those automatic thinking of you messages with flower and heart emojis that people send when they're bored. I stayed there, shrinking further and further into myself, feeling my body react to loneliness as if it were a physical illness. My appetite diminished. My sleep became too light, and even the sound of the television began to irritate me. Everything reminded me that I was out of place, like a picture hanging crooked on a wall that nobody wants to fix. I remembered my mother a lot these days. She died when I was in my 30s, and I remember that at the end of her life, she used to say that the worst thing wasn't dying. It was feeling that nobody needed her anymore. At the time, I thought it was an exaggeration. I still needed her. I loved her. But now I understand. Forced uselessness is a kind of exile. When they take away your home, your craft, the objects that gave your day meaning, the dishcloth you washed every Monday, the cracked mug you used just because it was a gift from a childhood friend. When all that disappears, what's left is an echo, and nobody listens to an old man's echo. One day, I asked the unit coordinator to let me know if there were any plans to leave. She frowned, as if the word departure was offensive. She said that my son had signed an indefinite stay contract, that all expenses were being paid on time, and that I should consider this place my new home. Home. Another word they like to use to soften the prison, as if it were enough to paint the walls cream and offer warm soups to make you forget that you've been discarded. The worst part isn't the rejection. The worst thing is that it comes disguised as care. At the end of that month, I received a letter with my name on it, the only letter since I was left there. The envelope was elegant, with an estate agent's crest emblazoned in the top left-hand corner. Inside, a standard letter thanking me for the lovely property sold recently, and wishing me many years of success with new projects. On the back, a business card with the realtor's name and a handwritten message. Your home has found a new beginning. Thank you for your trust. It hit me like a punch in the gut, not for the content, but for the certainty that I had been erased from my own history so coldly that even a stranger thought I had approved everything. I kept the letter in the drawer, but I tore up the card. A small gesture, almost ridiculous, but it was all I could do to resist. The feeling of powerlessness is so thick that sometimes I think I'm slowly drowning, without anyone noticing. The only thing that kept me conscious was anger, and it grew like a weed among the empty spaces of my new daily life. I began to remember all the moments when Daniel had shown indifference, even when I pretended not to notice. The high school graduation when he introduced me as, "My mom, she only works from home." His first job when he called me a bit paranoid for asking if he was going to eat properly. The increasingly spaced-out visits, the impersonal Christmas presents, generic boxes with lavender creams and soaps, lavender, always lavender, as if I had been packaged into a stereotype of a nameless old woman. There was a day, I don't know which one, when something inside me broke for good. I was passing breakfast to another resident who was shaking too much to hold the cup, and I realized that no one looked at me as someone with a story anymore. I became the lady in room 18 who helps the others, and no longer Helen, Daniel's mother, former seamstress, Harold's widow, resident of the White House with a balcony. I became a number, an auxiliary function, a friendly ghost circulating among the other forgotten people. And at that moment, I understood. If I didn't do something, I'd be like Alma, the one who sang bass and then disappeared. So I started to take notes. I took an old notebook from the library in the north wing, hidden behind books that nobody read, and I started writing everything down. Day by day, memory by memory. My house, my son, what happened, what I felt. Each line was an attempt to shout out to a world that had already left me behind. Writing became a ritual. The only way I could reaffirm that I existed, and that I remembered. I remembered everything. And that, no, I wouldn't forgive. There was a Sunday when the nursing home was especially quiet. No visitors, no scheduled activities, no background music. The nurses circulated in silence, pushing wheelchairs with the smoothness of someone who has given up in a hurry. I sat by the window all day, watching the empty parking lot. It was as if the world outside had forgotten about us, as if time had chosen to stop exactly where no one could see it. I kept trying to remember a word I used a lot when I was younger, a word that meant comfort, home, presence, and I couldn't remember. I felt an emptiness that wasn't just mental, but physical, as if someone had ripped away my ability to feel connected to anything that made sense. I thought of Harold, my husband. He died one morning in August, after spending months fighting a cancer that was eating away more at his pride than his body. He became quieter, lighter, more transparent, until one day he just wasn't there anymore. When Daniel came to the wake, he was in a suit, impeccable, but he left early. He said he had an important meeting the next day. At the time, I understood. Today, I can see that he was already practicing detachment, only the kind we disguise with words like busy life or unavoidable commitments. I stayed alone in that house, with Harold's silence impregnated in the furniture, and I carried on living. I sewed, I cooked, I looked after the plants. I never asked for anything. I never said, "Come and see me," because I learned early on that a good mother is one who doesn't demand. And now I see the price of that. The other residents began to notice my withdrawal. They commented quietly when I passed them in the corridor, "She's acting strange. I think it's getting worse." But no one really approached me. Nobody asked what was wrong with an old woman because deep down nobody wanted to hear it. Old people don't complain. If they complain, it's a tantrum. If they cry, it's neediness. If she's silent, it's because she's getting confused. So we learn to swallow everything: hurt, shame, anger. But I didn't want to swallow it. I wanted to shout. But shouting doesn't help. It becomes a diagnosis. It was on that day, on that silent Sunday, that I wrote a letter to Daniel, the first since he had admitted me. I didn't send it, but I did write, with firm handwriting, no flourishes, no feigned emotion. I wrote exactly how I felt. I said that he had ripped me away from the only thing that was mine, that he had sold not just a house, but my identity, that he had packed me up and deposited me in a warehouse with people he no longer wanted to see. He said that I knew he never planned to get me out, that the reform speech was just a fancy way of getting rid of the guilt. And finally, I said that he never had to worry about visiting me again, because I had already died for him, only in life. I folded the letter up and put it in my notebook, among the notes from days gone by. It was the only time I wrote without shaking. The following week was a repeat of the previous ones. Warm coffee at 7 a.m., physiotherapy at 10 a.m., soup at 12 p.m., forced nap at 2 p.m., bingo at 4 p.m., soap opera at 6 p.m., pills at 8 p.m. I began to feel my body surrendering. My legs, which used to carry me to the garden on their own, were now asking for support. My breathing became shorter. My face became paler. One day, the nurse took my blood pressure and asked if I wanted to see a doctor. I said no. She insisted. I said, "Let me," because at that point, what I wanted most was to really feel something. Even weakness seemed more honest than that daily life controlled by spreadsheets and protocols. One of those nights, I woke up to the sound of rain. The sound of water hitting the window took me back to my house, to the old roof that leaked near the stairs, to the leaks that Harold never managed to fix properly. I remembered the smell of wet wood, the towels on the floor, the laughter we used to have when we put basins under the drips. That sound made me cry in a way I hadn't been able to for a long time. A quiet cry, without sobs, that descended as if my body was too tired to even suffer. I cried because longing has a smell, a sound, and a texture. And because at that moment, I no longer wanted to survive in there. I just wanted to disappear, like Alma. The next morning, I asked to go to the garden. I was accompanied, as always. But this time, I sat on the ground. I refused the bench. I wanted to feel the grass, even if it was short, even if it was dry. I put my hands on the ground and closed my eyes. I felt the sun on my face and imagined myself burying my name there. Helen. A name that no one called with tenderness anymore. A name that had become a medical code, a locker label, a room record. I wanted the earth to swallow me up, to make me part of something new. Because in there, I was just a remnant, a vestige of people, and nobody survives being a remnant for long. That afternoon, I took a pill that hadn't been offered to me. I took it from the medication trolley, hidden away. I don't know exactly what it was, but I didn't care either. I wanted to see if I felt anything. I didn't die, but I slept like I hadn't slept for months. A heavy sleep, with no dreams, no noises, no memories. And when I woke up, I understood. I didn't want to die. I wanted to live away from there, but with dignity. And if no one was going to give me that, then I was going to take back what I could, even if it was late, even if it was in the loneliest way possible. The next night, I started planning my exit. I woke up the next day with a calm that only the final decision can bring. It wasn't peace. Peace is something else. It was certainty. The certainty that I needed to get out of there before I ceased to exist completely. That wasn't living. It was being kept, as if I were a plant that nobody wants, but doesn't throw away either. So they water it from time to time and wait for it to die without making a mess. I got tired of waiting for my own death, like someone waiting for a bus that never arrives. If I was going to disappear, I wanted to at least choose the direction. I waited until the afternoon, when the nurses were usually distracted by medicines and routine procedures. I pretended to be tired, asked not to take part in the day's recreational activity, a classic movie screening in which they always showed something that nobody remembered asking for. I went back to my room and waited. I knew the time the delivery of supplies arrived, and the side gate was open for a few minutes. I didn't need much, just a small bag with some change that I'd been saving for months. Change that I asked for in silence from other ladies who barely knew what they had in their pockets, and who gave it to me like candy to a child. I felt terrible about it, but everything was a bit dirty there. You learn that dignity sometimes needs to be stolen back. I went out the back door with short but firm steps. Nobody saw me, or they pretended not to. I walked to the bus stop, which was 2 blocks away. The air outside was different, even with the stifling heat, the smell of asphalt, and the reheated food from the trailers on the corner. Everything was different. I almost cried when I saw people shouting, cars honking, children running. It all seemed too noisy for someone who had spent months surrounded by old age and silence. But it was life, and I wanted to blend in. I took the bus with no certain destination. I got on and sat at the back, as I used to do in my youth, when I would go to work early in the morning and come back late at night with aching feet and a peaceful heart. Now my feet hurt just the same, but my heart was a war zone. I got off in downtown Columbus. I walked through the streets with the lightness of someone carrying only a bag and the need to be someone again. I entered an old coffee shop that I used to frequent with Harold. I sat in the same corner where he ordered 2 coffees, 1 strong and 1 weak, because he never knew how to do anything the right way. I stayed there for an hour. Nobody recognized me. Nobody noticed me. And yet, for the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Then I went to the old neighborhood. I walked slowly to my street. I didn't know what I wanted to find. Maybe a memory, maybe an answer. The house was there, painted, with the grass trimmed, with a luxury car in the garage. There was a couple on the balcony, young, beautiful, taking photos for some social network. I stood across the street. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want the house back. It was no longer mine. Everything there had been redone, cleaned, erased. The smell of coffee, the marks on the wall from Daniel's growth, the furniture scratched by the claws of our old cat. All of this had been replaced by a modern concept of decoration that sickened me just to look at. It wasn't my home anymore. It was just a set where I had once been a character. I walked to the city park. I sat on a bench near where we used to picnic. I remembered Daniel running between the trees, his knees scraped and his hair disheveled, laughing out loud, not knowing what guilt, debt, or hurt was. I remembered myself young, believing I was raising a good man. I remembered Harold eating slowly, always worried about chewing properly, because he said that life begins in the stomach. And there, between memories that only I could see, I decided what I would do. I didn't want to go back to the asylum. I didn't want to die there. I also didn't want to be a burden in someone's life. So I looked for a temporary shelter for elderly women. A place without luxury, but with open doors. I said I needed a place to sleep for a few weeks. The social worker looked at me with surprise, but listened. For the first time, someone listened to me without trying to medicate me. I lived there for 2 weeks. I met other women with stories as sad as mine. Some more so. One of them was left in a hospital by her grandchildren and never picked up again. Another lost everything to her son's addiction. They all had tired eyes and a bitter lucidity. And it was in this simple place, with creaking beds and bland food, that I felt more alive than in the whole asylum. Because no one there pretended that we were special. We were just old women trying to survive. And that, oddly enough, was more honest. With the help of the social worker, I got housing benefit, a small subsidized apartment in a more remote part of the city. When I got the key, I cried. A dry cry, without drama, a cry of rebirth. I decorated the place with simple things: a flowered fabric curtain, a comfortable armchair, an old radio I found at a flea market. I didn't need much. For the first time, I had a space that was mine alone. Small, quiet, humble, but mine. No wheels, no alarms, no tokens, no Daniel. I never called him again. I never picked up again. One of the letters I wrote, yes, I sent it. No rancor, no pleading, just the truth. I said I was alive, but not for him. That I wanted peace, but far away. That what he took from me wasn't just a house, but the faith that blood ties mean something. That he should get on with his life, guilt-free if he could, because I would follow mine, with scars, but with dignity. There was never an answer. Today, I live with what little I have. I make tea every afternoon, listen to old songs on the radio, and talk to a neighbor who calls me Miss H. Sometimes I write in my notebook. I've finished all the stories I started in the asylum, and I've kept it. Not to denounce, not to publish, but to remember. Because what they did to me won't be forgotten. But it won't be what defines me either. I turned 73 last week. I bought a small cake and ate it alone, smiling. I felt a strange joy, the kind you only feel when you've hit rock bottom and climbed back up. I'm not well, but I'm free. And that's more than enough for someone who's been treated like something disposable. Would you also trust if it was your son saying it was all for your own good? Let me know in the comments, and if you liked this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.